Why are Christians so resistant to the concept of fighting a culture war? This is Dispatches from the Culture War. I'm MD Perkins. Today I wanted to respond to 5 different objections that I've heard to the question of Christian engagement in the culture war from a negative perspective. These are objections that people have, obviously, things that they think definitively say why Christians should not be involved in fighting the culture war. In my previous video, I addressed the question of defining what the culture war is. What do we mean when we use that term? Why does that matter? And now I want to move into questions of the objections that people raise about the culture war. What are these objections and how can we handle them or understand them? And is there any validity to them? The first common objection: the culture war is only about politics. Christians are only interested in power. They're interested in getting their guy elected so that then they can control things and set everything back to the way that it was. Well, the picture of the culture war involves politics, but it isn't just political. Because when you're talking about the way that we think, the things that are normal, the things that are good, what is beautiful, the stories we tell, like Josh says, the stories we tell our children. This is why television was a fundamental aspect of the culture war in the 1970s for Donald Wildman. You know, Don was sitting down to watch TV with his family, and when he saw, there's only 3 networks on TV at this point, ABC, CBS, NBC, and each station is showing something objectionable. The reflection that he has is, what has happened to society that would lead to this just being a normal weeknight, where profanity, violence, sexuality is just blatantly on display in my living room? You know, that's the thing behind television. It was going into the intimacy of people's homes, people sitting around together as families, or children just turning on the television and watching it. You can't control who's hearing the message. You know, in a movie that was rated R in the movie theaters, you could control who came into the theater. But when you're blasting something through the television airwaves, it's going into people's homes. So that impacts everyone. Everyone is being shaped by not just the messages, but the tone, the style, the way in which stories are unfolding, the way in which things are presented as normal or good, the way that a story resolves. All of these things are teaching people about what is good, what is right, what is true. And so Don, as a minister, recognized this and began to stand up and speak out about it, because there was also the reality that the television airways were publicly owned. And so he felt a sense of responsibility as a citizen of this society that he had never thought about the impact of television on society. But now he begins to take up arms and to say, well, I have some things that I can write these letters. I can initiate boycott campaigns against sponsors of these shows. And I can try and initiate a public dialogue about the nature of television, the way that television has declined from its inception and the intentions behind it, its educational potential, as well as the great harm that it can have because of its educational potential. And so all of those things became aspects of the culture war. So when we talk about the culture war as being purely political, or when it's presented as being purely political, you're either misinformed or you're being misleading, because the culture war is more than just politics, because the culture is more than just politics. The culture is what people do. What is their sense of normal? What is their sense of what is right and wrong? And that impacts things from a policy-making decision. It impacts Supreme Court justice decisions, but it also impacts just normal decisions that we make as individuals, as citizens, as families, as children. And so all of those things are impacted. So it's a misnomer to act like the culture war is only about politics. So second objection: secondary issues should remain secondary. And this is something that J.D. Greear recently brought up in in a post he had on the Gospel Coalition titled Faithfulness Amid the Culture War. So this is part of a book he's writing, of course, and his claim, the opening line here, is that faithfulness to Jesus' mission isn't less than boldness in the culture war, it's much more. What does he mean by that exactly? Of course, he's not going to fully define that because he's full of glittering generalities. But the thing that he really harps on is the idea that our central assignment as Christians, that is the thing that we're most called to do, is the Great Commission. And the Great Commission is about bringing people to Jesus. It's not about bringing people to a political position. Now, that is true. In a sense, that is true. But the question of primary and secondary issues is one that I think is worth exploring a little bit more. Now, I was recently at the Pray Vote Stand conference in Chino Hills, California, and there was an excellent panel discussion about how to respond to issues in a hostile culture, in a hostile world, and about having conversations with people who disagree with you, and our position as people in the church, as Christians, when we're confronted with these ideas. And Mike Winger had an excellent statement about this idea of primary and secondary issues. Let me just play that for you.
But there are issues today that are popping up in churches. They're biblical issues, but they're secondary issues. And people say, let's not get to those issues because we want to be able to present the gospel. Those issues are still important, are they not?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I'm just sort of developing and changing and shifting in my own opinions on some of these things. Not what is the biblical truth about them, but what is the priority to discuss them and push forward into all spheres talking about them. And I can give you a couple examples. Okay, paying taxes, that's got to be a secondary issue. You know, it's not the gospel.
Unless you work for the IRS.
Right, unless you work for the IRS.
Then it's priority for them.
But Jesus talked about paying taxes, did he not? He was confronted with what was a hot-button secondary issue, and he went ahead and brought true clarity, perfect answer to the topic right there. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. And divorce, hot-button issue. When he was asked about divorce, there were people listening to him who were going to stop following him because he answered the way that they didn't like. And he went ahead and said, if you do this other than this reason, nah. And so that would have been he did exactly the thing we're not doing. He did exactly the thing we're not doing.
And why are we not doing it?
I think we're not doing it because we're afraid that we'll lose them for the gospel because we targeted this issue that wasn't the gospel.
But is that a narrow view of the gospel?
So, well, it is a narrow view of the gospel because the image of God has a lot to do with the gospel as well, things like that. But I also think this, we've underestimated how much these secondary issues are actually our neighbor's primary issues. Okay, that's the center of their worldview is this identity issue, this homosexuality issue, this fill in the blank. And when you would leave that alone, you're leaving the stronghold center of their worldview alone, and that's the thing that's making them resistant to the gospel of Christ. So that if you do win them to the gospel, but you avoid this issue, you may not have won them at all. Because you bring them to church, and you're like, maybe eventually it will trickle out, and they'll deal with their homosexuality, or they will deal with their trans identity issues. But then you find they don't, and when it finally gets confronted, they just bail. So when you then take this one-on-one approach of avoid these secondary issues and you export it to churches widely across the country, we abandon central issues our people are dealing with. And we leave them alone without any guidance from the light of the world on these issues that are destroying their souls. So I'm kind of wanting to focus on those things a lot more.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
You certainly can. Go right ahead.
So there is something that
I'm filled with grace. So
thank you.
Go right ahead.
No, I won't test it too much.
Okay. All right.
We've actually seen a phenomenon across this country, and that is political conservatism has led to a spiritual revival. Because Christians have spoken into the culture with sanity and evidence, and the source, people go, okay, this makes a whole lot more sense. And you're a Christian? Interesting. I'm getting good information from you. And we actually saw this in a really beautiful way. There was a woman named Louise Perry. She wrote a book called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. She was a secular feminist. Her book came out in 2023. She said, I am not a Christian, but I've spent a lot of time studying the historical evidence of what sexuality was like before Christianity entered the scene in the 1st and 2nd centuries of Rome. And then I saw the ethics built up around those Christian ideas. And then I saw the well-being of women and children specifically plummet in the wake of the sexual revolution. So she critiqued the sexual revolution not because she found it in the Word of God, but she studied it in the world of God. And about 3 weeks ago, she said, I'm now a Christian. And I'll tell you why. She said, because I saw that if something was sociologically true, then it must be spiritually true as well. The thing that she could test, the veracity of Scripture's claims about male and female, about the guidelines around sex and fidelity within marriage and heterosexuality within marriage, led her to the place where she goes, if this is trustworthy and Christians got this right, I wonder if they're right about the other things too.
When we ask the question of what is a primary and a secondary issue, J.D. Greer's appealing to the Great Commission, which of course is found at the very end of the book of Matthew. Matthew 28:18. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. So J.D. Greer says this is our great calling as Christians. It is. I mean, that's not a controversial statement. Everybody should agree that the Great Commission is our central calling as Christians. But there's two things to notice about the Great Commission. The first is that Jesus said, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Why does Christ appeal to his authority here? So authority is something central to the message of Christ. Christ's authority is central to this message. Now, Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. So Christ has authority in heaven. He also has authority on earth, and he has authority on earth now. So that's something to take stock in, to recognize that's there in the passage. And when we're talking about the Great Commission, in the back of our mind, the context for that should be the authority of Christ. So he goes on, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Okay, so there's a worldwide missionary effort, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay, so you're bringing them into the local church. So the work of the local church is essential to this aspect of the Great Commission. And then it says, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Teaching them to observe all I have commanded you. Now, as many people have pointed out, this is an issue of discipleship that goes well beyond just getting people in the doors and having them give a profession of faith. This is about building people up in their understanding of the Christian faith, what the Bible teaches. That's all I have commanded you, Christ says. So building up their understanding of the world, themselves, the church, society, everything in light of who Christ is and what he said. And part of what he said is his law. And so the law is part of our increased understanding. It's a schoolmaster that brings us to Christ. It convinces us of sin. It teaches us that we are sinners, the ways in which we stray, and it constantly calls us back to conformity to the standard that God set up for us. The law is not how we get right with God. We don't get right by just living better. We get right by humbling ourselves before the authority of Christ, saying we have nothing to bring, and we accept the free offer of Christ in the gospel. Okay, now what? Well, now we are learning to observe. If we flip the roles, instead of teaching them to observe, now we're learning to observe. So as an individual, you're learning to observe all that Christ has commanded you. Now, that covers everything. That covers your parenting. It covers your thought life. It covers how you eat, how you dress, how you live in society, the way that you drive down the road. Do you drive down the road living under Christ's authority? Because Christ has actually given the authority to enforce the traffic laws to the government. Are you living under Christ's authority in that way? So as you start to see, won't you realize, yes, I mean, we're called to make disciples. We're called to call people to repentance. We're called to evangelize. But the picture of what that looks like is far bigger than just teaching people biblical principles and platitudes. It includes very practical issues of life. And as Mike alluded to there in the clip, Mike Winger, he talks about money. Well, money is a real key indicator of what you value, what you truly love, and where you're willing to spend the thing that you value. What do you spend your money on? How do you acquire money? How do you cherish money? We all know that money can become an idol. I mean, Christ himself said money is the root of all kinds of evil. So it's something, but it's necessary for life in this world. And so we're not to distance ourselves from money just because it can have temptations attached to it. We know it has temptations attached to it. So then what do we do in light of that? And so that's where guys like J.D. Greear and the people who kind of present this third way concept get it wrong, is because they kind of want to over-spiritualize everything. And so it's almost as if we're all just having a Bible study perpetually all the time, but never actually going out and doing anything with the things that we learn. So that's where a guy like J.D. Greear, I think, gets it wrong. And that's when you say the secondary issues should remain secondary, you're also not thinking about the way that a secondary issue is the primary issue to someone else that you're dealing with. And we see this in all of the culture war issues that touch on issues of family. Because why is abortion argued for so vehemently among some people? I was just having a conversation today with a friend who watched the Allie Beth Stuckey confronting 20 progressive Christians video or whatever, and he was just kind of astonished that there was this very old man. There was an older gentleman on there who was arguing with Allie Beth Stuckey about her position on abortion. And like, he's an old single guy. What investment does he have in the issue of abortion? Yet he was so vehemently arguing that abortion should be allowed, or that her position against abortion should change. I don't know I didn't watch it. But just that idea that you have this old man who is arguing for abortion because something about it is in him, that people should have the right to do this. Women should have the right to abort their babies. It just gets it, like, the secondary issue may actually be somebody's primary issue. And the thing that's keeping someone from Christ is them holding on to that issue so vehemently that they are resisting all of the other things attached to Christianity, because that is actually their idol. All right, so a third common objection, that the culture war is just an expression of self-righteousness. Now, this is something that came out a few years ago in an article by Hannah Anderson for Christianity Today, Confessions of a Past Culture Warrior, where she related her culture warring as just an ignorant part of her youth, because her fashion blunders and the culture war were both kind of the same thing in her mind as she's presenting here. But she kind of acts like, well, we just can't quit the culture war because it's an opportunity for our self-righteousness to come through. Now, the reality here is, I'm sure that's the case for some people, maybe a lot of people. I don't really know. I don't know people's hearts. But I know that Hannah is telling on herself here, but it doesn't seem like she's grown out of self-righteousness when she critiques those who engage in the culture war as somehow being self-righteous. Because she's sitting here on the sidelines saying that you're self-righteous and therefore that's invalid for you to engage in the culture war. Here's something. Can we just say that does the wrong use of something invalidate its proper use? So just because there are some people who are engaging in the culture war improperly, who might be self-righteous, who might be presenting themselves in a way that's not helpful, does that mean that we should just resist the culture war because some people are using it improperly? Obviously not. I mean, everything, like we were using with the example of money earlier, everything has a proper use and has myriad of improper uses, but the improper uses should not invalidate the valid, proper use of the thing. And so we can't just remove ourselves from money just because a lot of people use money improperly. We still have to use money, just use it properly. That should be the admonition to Christians. Don't disengage from the culture war, just engage properly. Keep the right perspectives, keep the right priorities, keep your eye on the ball. Make sure that the right things, that the central things remain the central things, and that you're not hindering these other aspects of the Christian witness. Like, the validity of public witness should be extolled and acknowledged, not just dismissed because it makes you uncomfortable, it makes you squeamish, or it makes other people, quite frankly, this is probably what it's getting at, it makes other people see you as part of this other group with people that you'd rather not be identified with. It's really a question of the fear of man and our own pride. I don't want to be identified as a guy with a picket sign out in front of an abortion clinic, so I'm going to be a little more reserved or subdued in my opposition to abortion. I'll hold that view personally, but I'm not going to be very vocal about it because I don't want people to see me as one of those people with picket signs. It's just pride. It's just pride. That's all it is. And pride impacts me as much as it impacts other people. And we're all susceptible to that temptation toward pride and to somehow curb our message and reserve it in some ways so that it doesn't come with the same piercing clarity that maybe it should in certain situations because we're afraid of the consequences. We don't want other people to see them. You know, you think about Ezekiel chapter 2. This passage was really important to me as I thought about what does it mean to have a prophetic witness. And Christ, God the Father, as he's calling Ezekiel to this. I mean, Christ is God, so yes, Christ is also calling Ezekiel. But specifically in this context is the Lord. And he said to me, Son of man, I send you to the people of Israel, to nations of rebels who have rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. The descendants also are impudent and stubborn. I send you to them, and you shall say to them, Thus says the Lord God. And whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, Son of man, be not afraid of them, nor be afraid of their words. Nor be afraid of their words. Though briars and thorns are with you, and you sit on scorpions, be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, for they are a rebellious house, and you shall speak my words to them, whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house. God knows us so well. We're intimidated by people, and even more, we're intimidated by what someone might say about me. What are they going to say? What are they going to think? What kind of look am I going to get? Other forms of communication here. Do not be afraid of their looks. I mean, we know someone can look at us in such a way that lets us know very clearly what they believe and their opposition to what we're saying or what we're doing. We know that. Parents know that especially because we can communicate nonverbally to our children, and they are communicating constantly nonverbally to us. So I think that's an important question. So when we come to the issue of self-righteousness, okay, so some people have been self-righteous, so don't be self-righteous in the culture war. That should solve that issue. The fourth objection, it's the wrong posture. We should be for something more than we are against something. I hear this one often. You're always talking about what you're against, but you're never talking about what you're for. That's just where you're wrong. Have you ever been to a church? We're constantly talking about what we are for. We are for Christ. We are for righteousness. We are for sanity. We are for the protection of children. We are for a lot of things. Pro-life is pro-life. I am for life. I am for children who are immediately conceived to have the opportunity to come into this world and be able to live outside of their mother's womb and grow up and have a normal life as an adult. That's what I'm for. So, you're always just talking about what you're against. You're never talking about what you're for. Well, that's an issue of media spin more than it is an actual question of reality. Because the media will always want to talk about what Christians are against, especially conservative Christians. They want to say, because it's all about stirring up this kind of animosity. It's about fear-mongering, all of these different things. You know what Christians are for. That should be pretty obvious and pretty clear. So I just dismiss that out of hand. That we're not presenting clearly what we're for. Now, are there ways that you can be too negative? Of course. Are there ways that you can overemphasize negative things in a way that feels dismissive or despairing or makes it seem like there's no hope or makes it seem like people are just enemies on the other side and not souls in need of compassion and outreach? Of course. But again, does the improper use of a thing invalidate the proper use of the thing? No. So let's just move on from that. And then the fifth common objection is that you're just exploiting fear and outrage. I mean, this is something that Don faced back in the day. Christians still face it today because when you start a parachurch organization like Don started, you're starting an organization, you're building an institution. What do institutions need as everyone needs? Funding. How do you get funding? People give you funding. People give you money because they believe in your cause. They believe in what you're doing. And then if you prove that over time, you will continue to have people give you what you need to support yourself and your efforts. Because that's the nature of nonprofits. And I would wager to say that all of the people who object to this, who I've read, people like Russell Moore, people like, I don't know who Hannah Anderson works for, if she has some entity that she's involved with, but J.D. Greer, I mean, you also receive funding. You're also receiving a paycheck. You also get royalties from your books and when you promote yourself. And so don't act like someone like Don or other culture warriors are just out here to just stoke outrage and fear in order to get people to donate out of outrage and fear so that then they can support their own cause and group. There's actual work that goes on behind the scenes in ministries like this. I get that there, of course, I mean, I'm sure there are organizations out there that are not doing the work that they promise to do. Don't give to them. Give to people who are doing the work that they promise to do and who are willing to be transparent in how they approach that so that people can give with confidence, with trust, and understanding the leadership of that organization or ministry so that they can believe that what they're doing is actually the thing that they said that they would do. The cause that they're fighting is the cause they're actually fighting. Obviously, nobody's perfect in this. No institution, no organization is going to be perfect in this. But again, this is just a lie of the left. And you saw it, particularly in Don's story, you saw it with the National Endowment for the Arts. So when Don opposed the National Endowment of the Arts and was highlighting the fact that the NEA in the late 1980s, early 1990s was giving funding to artists and art institutions that were producing artwork that the average person would look at and say, that's gross, that's pornographic, that's blasphemous, that offends me, I'm not interested in that. And the government is funding this. He wasn't saying anything about people's individual right to do those kinds of things, as unsavory as they may be. But for the government to be funding that as some sort of institutional effort to enrich society and culture through art, he saw that as problematic. And when he would talk about this, of course, he would do so in his letters to his constituents. And what do you do in letters to constituents when you are an organization that needs to be funded in order to maintain your battles for certain causes? You have a pitch to fundraise. It's common practice. And institutions like the NEA do this just as often. I mean, think of those PBS fundraisers that you saw endless drives for throughout the 90s and 2000s. It's like those institutions aren't operating on goodwill and charity. They need funding too. They need people to give. And so the fact that people are giving to certain causes doesn't invalidate the cause itself. But even talking about fear-mongering, is the culture war just fear-mongering? I don't see that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm looking in better places than other people are looking. Maybe AFA presents a better pattern than a lot of places give. I mean, I'm willing to concede that point because I do believe that AFA presents a very good pattern for how we should engage in these issues as part of why I'm happy to work for this organization. But is it really all about fear-mongering? It's just not. But where is the fear-mongering coming from? Again, you have to understand the institutional threat that groups like AFA pose to the establishment of media when they present a certain picture of Christians and Christian engagement and Christian problems with society. They always have to twist it, and they always have to present a way in which Christians are really just under the surface. We're just money-hungry people trying to get ours, and we've just found a way to manipulate the public. Sadly, that happens a lot in Christian circles because Christians, quite frankly, are very generous. Christians are very generous. They give so much money to different causes, to people, to humanitarian efforts. So much is given by people of faith to these different causes that it is easy for people to be wolves in sheep's clothing to come in and try and manipulate that and gain from it. I'm sure there's other objections that people have out there. I read numerous articles on this subject. I've seen lots of statements, lots of ink that's been spilled in actual print and in online stuff, and social media is full of these common conversations. But I think the objections are mostly ill-founded. It's not that there isn't any validity to any of them. It's that they're usually misapplied or don't recognize the bigger picture of what's going on. And so they're using it just kind of as a bludgeon to get Christians to shut up and to stop speaking out. That's typically what I see in these whole conversations about the third way and other things like that, is an attempt to get Christians to just shut up, sit down, be on the sidelines, and let's let the professionals, whoever those are in secular society, work out what's best for secular society, because there is that sensibility underneath it that secular society knows what's best for itself, whereas Christians have no sense. They're just out for their own interests. But secular society is looking out for everyone. That's obviously not true. There's plenty of people in secular society who are looking out for the public good. And this is part of why Christians have been able to lock arms with other people who don't even hold their Christian values, because we share some fundamental aspect, some principle underneath this fight we share in common, even though in the big picture we don't share all things in common. Because I think that's another thing that people are kind of timid about with the culture war, is the idea that maybe I'm locking arms with somebody. Is it purely for just a political cause and all these different things? Sometimes it is, but I mean, what's wrong with locking arms and building a coalition with somebody who agrees with you in principle, even though fundamentally there may be some disagreements about the causes behind that or the actual larger issues of theology and submission to God's will? It doesn't mean we can't have common course with other people just because there's fundamental worldview differences at different places down the line. And so even that, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. But either way, I mean, the concept of the culture wars continue to be controversial. People will continue to use it to try and move people towards certain causes or get them to silence or step away from certain causes. I think you do have to recognize that there is also political motivation for people to dissuade people from being engaged and active in the culture war, to try and get Christians to step away and be more distant, more silent, less involved. There's political implications behind that too. And so don't sit here and act like you're some sort of high and lofty, politically neutral person who, is really just concerned about the gospel, but everything else is sort of secondary issues. We've already kind of debunked those points, and so hopefully you can see now with some sense of clarity, or even just understand the arguments why someone would engage in the culture war. If you don't want to, that's between you and the Lord. But for me and my house, we will fight the culture war.